Lawmakers are working to override some vetoes, and J.B. Pritzker gets the transition going. We'll talk about it next on Capitol View. Welcome to Capitol View, the program where we talk about state issues, sometimes federal issues, and how they just might affect your life. I'm Bernie Schoenburg from the State Journal-Register. The legislature was in this week for a few days working to override some vetoes, or to at least discuss them. With me here today, Adrianna Pitrelli is back. She is from the Chicago Daily Law Bulletin, State House Bureau. Welcome back.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
And Dave Dahl is here again, reporter with WTAX Radio here in Springfield. Welcome.
Thank you. Yes.
Okay. Well, there was a lot of override action. Interestingly, the election is over. We know Governor Rauner, who vetoed or mandatorily vetoed many bills, is now a lame duck governor. We in the press, unless I missed something, did not see him during most of the week at all. I believe he was around Springfield, but not doing public stuff. And lawmakers were taking some of his actions and saying no. So one of those issues was his veto of a bill which would raise the age to purchase tobacco in Illinois from 18 to 21. Adrianna, the Senate voted to override. How'd that go? And let's review some of the arguments for folks, because of course, you know, if you're 18, you're old enough to join the Army, et cetera.
Right, and that was a big one. So that passed the Senate 36-19, I believe, and a lot of the arguments were about how the Department of Revenue, that will cut the tax receipts by about $40 million, and then the sales tax by about $6 million. So not only are people saying, hey, you can serve in the armed forces, why can't you buy tobacco? They're also saying, well, this has a financial impact on the state itself. Rauner said, though, that this bill is not going to keep tobacco out of the hands of these people that are 18 or 21 or younger, and so it's interesting why that's even being brought up. It only passed the House originally with 61 votes, so in order for this to be overridden, they are going to need 10 more people to go ahead and side with them. It
takes 71 to override.
Yes, and it's already legal in 6 states, so maybe Illinois will be the 7th, I don't know.
Yeah, Dave?
Well, Senator Hastings said if you're a smoker and out of shape, the military doesn't want you anyway.
And he's a veteran himself.
Yes, and what's more,
he's from the suburbs.
Yes, Tinley Park. And Tobacco 21 is already the law in Chicago and in Lake County and in Peoria and a number of other places in Illinois. So quite a few people in the state already live under the Tobacco 21 law. The governor says it would send people scurrying for the borders, and who knows what else they'd buy in places like Missouri or Indiana or Wisconsin.
Right, and I'm wondering, do we think this is a partisan thing? I know clearly the idea behind this is to enhance people's health, and the Lung Association is big on trying to restrict tobacco sales, but the governor, who's kind of more of a free market person, Governor Rauner, basically saying this will hurt business. Is it more likely Republicans than Democrats feel that way, from what we can tell?
It seems like it. It does.
Yeah. And so on we go. We will see, again, as Adrianna pointed out, it's needing those extra votes. I think a lot of, if you only pass this with 61, it could be a tough go. This is interesting because I've been covering Springfield for long enough, about 40 years, to know that, like, the Clean Indoor Air Act, which, if I remember, was a firefighter or state representative from Chicago named Bob Terzich. He went, I don't know if it was 10 years or more, and it might have been more than that, trying to get cigarettes banned in indoor spaces and even in restaurants. And boy, that was just a major, now that's just the law of the land everywhere. You have to leave a building to smoke almost everywhere in a business. That was a major shift in what people thought about an issue in Illinois, but it took years to get there. So getting this age from 18 to 21, we'll see how it goes. We'll see if the fact that Governor Rauner will not be governor shortly makes any difference to another few people in the House or not. I'm not sure how hard he's been lobbying on keeping things, but I know there were several bills that were overridden during the week. And of course, we had 3 days this last week of veto session, and then there's a week off for Thanksgiving, and then the week after that, I believe, is 3 more days of veto session. So if something was overridden in one house, it doesn't actually take effect until both houses do it. So, that other house across the way will be able to deal with it the next time they meet. One of the other issues was it deals with the Quincy Veterans Home is kind of the genesis of it, where more than a dozen people died from Legionnaire's disease. But because it's a state facility, when they try to take legal action, civil action, to get paid for damages, they have to go through the Illinois Court of Claims, which is a special court set up for state facilities. And there's a limit there of an award of $100,000, which in court cases is very small. There's legislation that would raise that limit for Court of Claims cases to $2 million. And Adrianna, where's that?
So it's interesting because the governor's not against raising that cap, but he only wants to raise it to $300,000, which might seem doable. But the Illinois Trial Lawyers Association actually came out and said that that cap in Illinois has not been raised since 1971, and it's actually the lowest cap in the entire country. So that's interesting because this bill wouldn't just affect the Quincy Veterans Home. It would affect so many cases from here on out. I think possibly that we could see this being overridden in the House. I don't have the exact numbers,
Right, but the Senate did override.
The Senate did override it, and it did very well in the House when it went through the last time.
Yeah, Dave, I mean, it's an interesting situation because there's so much emotion tied up in the loss of veterans and spouses of veterans at the Quincy Veterans Home. That would seem to perhaps give more impetus to a bill like this?
Well, you wonder what is a life worth, and I wouldn't want to answer that, but it's certainly worth more than $100,000 and probably more than $300,000. And I think it did pass the House the first time with more than 71. So if that would hold, ... But of course it gives the lawmakers an excellent chance to throw the whole Quincy matter back on Rauner and hang the Quincy Veterans Home around his neck as he counts the days toward returning to private life.
Is that really necessary now that the election is over, do you think?
It certainly didn't diminish, again, Senator Hastings' seeming glee in making his argument that it's all the administration's fault, and the administration hid the emails, and the Veterans Home released a broth of Legionella into the Veterans Home, it now turns out.
Yeah,
there aren't many. Governor Rauner is fighting himself with even fewer friends in the General Assembly than ever.
Very interesting. Well, we should mention that the ongoing case and a lot of the reporting on Legionella outbreak and kind of the cumulative look at that, the lawsuits. WBEZ Public Radio in Chicago has done some stories, and the last one that they did was revealing that Adams County Grand Jury has issued subpoenas to the governor's office asking for apparently the same emails, some of which WBEZ has received, which, as Dave noted, some indicated that there was like the press office in the governor's office was saying, no, let's wait to tell the public until we get a question on this, for example, when there are some people in the medical field who say as soon as you knew there was Legionella, you should tell the staff, you should tell the public, you should tell the families, so that if they want to do something with the loved ones they've got living there, if they want to move them, this is the time, and don't wait 6 days.
As opposed to staff members finding out on Facebook, for example. Yeah,
so very, very difficult situation. We'll see where it goes. Also, I believe it was after a meeting of the House Democratic Caucus this week, Speaker Madigan. We've heard of him because of all these ads on commercial TV and radio during the past campaign. But he's, of course, the Democrat who Governor Rauner tried to blame for all the bad stuff in the state. But he did say that a couple of the things that J.B. Pritzker, who is now the governor-elect, the Democrat from Chicago, has talked about wanting are things that he is okay with. One of those is moving Illinois to approve the sale of recreational marijuana, where now it is only for medical purposes for certain illnesses that are spelled out. And the other is to move towards an amendment to the state constitution to allow a graduated income tax instead of the flat income tax that we have now that lets rich people pay the same percentage as poorer people, whereas most states have graduated. So that would indicate, Adrianna, that when the legislature comes in January, things could go Pritzker's way on a few big issues.
It seems like it. Pritzker said, Madigan said in that little gaggle, I guess you would call it, that he expects to work very well with Pritzker. He seems like he's really looking forward to it. He even said he was happy that Rauner was finally leaving. And so I think over the next 4 years, instead of seeing, the fighting that we have seen over the last 4 years between the Speaker's office and the Governor's office, we will see a lot more things going their ways.
Yeah, now Dave, of course, Governor Rauner during the campaign made just that point. Pritzker will work well with Madigan. Hold on to your wallet, Illinois taxpayer. How do you view how the Democrats will handle that, given they're going to have both overwhelming majorities in now the House and Senate and the governor's office?
Recreational marijuana, I'm not convinced is going to move that quickly. It's taken a long time to get medical marijuana to where it is. I'm not sure it's something that can pass in just 1 year. And as far as the graduated income tax, that takes a 3/5 vote of both chambers, as well as the entire state of Illinois,
right.
A 3/5 vote.
And you can characterize it as, even if legislators say, I want the rich to pay more, and for fairness, you're still going to get anti-tax people, as Governor Rauner has been, saying you are raising our taxes with that vote. So it's a very tough vote, especially for House members, all of whom have to go up for election in another 2 years.
It's going to be a tough vote, and it's going to be a tough consideration for people in the voting booth. I mean, what is the wording of the amendment going to be? Who are the rich people? I know they're going to be richer than me, right?
Well, you work in radio, Dave. But that's
right?
Okay.
Well, that's what you think.
Yeah.
I mean, I mentioned to J.B. Pritzker a while ago that the problem is, we're going to wake up and look at the rates and say, I didn't realize I was upper middle class.
Mm-hmm.
Where is the middle class?
Right. And of course, Pritzker, during the entire campaign and continuing into the transition, has not said what he thinks the bracket should be, where they should be set, saying we have to work with the legislature. Certainly before the election, that kept him out of the trouble of giving that highest rate to the highest earners, where then the opposition could say, oh, look what he wants to do to everyone. And he keeps saying that he wants people in the middle class and those striving to be in the middle class to pay less, and those rich people like me and Bruce Rauner to pay more. But again, we don't know the brackets yet, so the mystery remains until they work that out. And then, of course, as Dave mentioned, a constitutional amendment has to pass the legislature, be put on a ballot, and so can't go into effect until, and I think the vote on that would be like in 2020.
I think you're right.
Because people have to approve, the voting public has to approve a constitutional amendment. So
the short story is that an income of $100,000 doesn't go as far as it used to.
I've heard that.
Yeah, I can only guess. But.
As legislators came into Springfield this week, something else that happened is I believe 3 of the caucuses of the 4 have met, and the leadership team so far looks like it's going to be the same as that we have come to know. So Senate Republicans have again chosen Senator Bill Brady. These are votes in caucus, in meetings. The formal election of these people to leadership positions will come in January, when the new legislature is sworn in. But Bill Brady, state senator from Bloomington, will remain Republican leader of the Senate. Jim Durkin, Western Springs, will remain Republican leader of the House. John Cullerton will remain president of the Senate, a Democrat from Chicago. Mike Madigan, we believe, I don't think the formal vote of the caucus meeting is going to take place during the second week of veto session, is certainly likely to be leader of the Democrats in the House again, and Speaker of the House, who of course controls the gavel in the flow of legislation, as we've heard a lot about. Good or bad for Illinois? I don't know if that's a fair question. The leadership team is the same. Dave, you've been here for a bit.
The leadership team will be the same. The governor is going to be different. And plus, the voters of Illinois have given the House and Senate Democratic supermajorities. The governor was talking about picking up 9 seats for the Republicans. Instead, the Democrats picked up 6. They picked up 7 and lost 1. So the net gain is 6. So it is back to a supermajority for the Democrats. I'm not sure if the fact that Madigan's back and Cullerton's back is necessarily a bad thing or necessarily a good thing, but the whole dynamic and mood has changed with the change in the governor's office.
Adrianna, on another interesting topic, Susana Mendoza is just got easily reelected comptroller, and turned right around, and there was some hint of this before because part of a videotape announcing she was going to run for mayor of Chicago leaked just before the election. But she has now announced for mayor of Chicago, which is a spring election. There are more than a dozen candidates up there running, but Susana Mendoza is someone who has already been city clerk of the city of Chicago, so she's well known up there, and obviously she was a much higher profile state comptroller because she was passing legislation for accountability that was over the wishes of Governor Rauner a few times. So any reaction that you have heard or your thoughts about one of our just elected state officials for another 4 years running for mayor of Chicago?
It was interesting. So when that ad came out, before the election, I kind of thought, okay, well, maybe if she is reelected, then she just won't make a run for it. And then 8 days after the election, hey, she's running. So I think she's the 17th candidate to run, to put their name in. I think most people are speculating she's probably the last at this point. I mean, she's worked in politics for, 18 years or so. She already has policy she wants to work on. She's really focusing on the crime in Chicago, which I know a lot of people obviously care about. It's a big issue. The high taxes in Chicago. So she's already out there. She has a plan, so we'll see where it goes in the months to come.
Dave, should people hold it against their elected leaders when they win one office and turn around to run for another?
I don't hold it against you that you're negotiating with the New York Times right now to move out of
Please.
Springfield, even though you're writing your column.
Don't tell my wife.
No, yeah, exactly.
Okay.
You could say that's bad. You could say, I'm not going to vote for Mendoza because of this. On the other hand, you could say, what would you do if it were you? Being the mayor of Chicago could be the pinnacle of one's career, not necessarily being controller. The timing, especially with the late word that Mayor Emanuel of Chicago is not seeking a new term.
Right.
If not now, when? And plus, Susana Mendoza is one of the few people that everybody knows who is in that mix for mayor of Chicago, someone who gets attention. Right. You've got Mendoza, you've got the president of the Cook County Board, Tony Preckwinkle.
Right.
And who else? Can you name anybody who's interesting?
I understand you. Well, there's Bill, I think Bill Daley is running, and he's the brother and son of former mayors of Chicago and former chief of staff to President Obama for a while.
And he's been running for things and bailing out too.
He has. Yes. There takes a certain fire to do this, and we would see if he has it, and she clearly has that, and we'll see where this goes. But it's the first time I met Susana Mendoza, and I should say, I think it was 10 years in the legislature, even before she was city clerk of Chicago. But the first time I met her was one year when filing happened at the State Board of Elections for candidates. And they always line up sometimes a few days in advance. She was first in line one time, and she was running against a regular Democrat from Chicago, and she lost. And 2 years later, she was first in line again to file, and then she won. So it's interesting now that the Republicans paint her as, another machine, Madigan pawn, and yet she got in the legislature initially by running against those same people. So it's kind of interesting how far somebody goes in those number of years. Well, speaking of Democrats elected, J.B. Pritzker and State Representative Juliana Stratton, who was his running mate and will be lieutenant governor starting in January, they have continued to announce parts of the transition. We know that in the overall transition team, one of the co-chairs is former Republican Governor Jim Edgar. Certainly he's moderate on some social issues, but Pritzker and Stratton are showing that they are trying to be bipartisan in at least including some Republicans and things. Their veterans transition group, they call it the Serving Illinois Heroes Committee, is chaired by Jesse White, Secretary of State, Tammy Duckworth, obviously injured in the Iraq War and now in the United States Senate and a Democrat. But suburban GOP State Representative David Harris is another one. And I just thought that was an interesting choice. He is a former Adjutant General of Illinois, which is in charge of the National Guard. He is not running for re-election this year, but he is a Republican. And what I remember in particular about David Harris is when it was like 15 Republicans broke with the governor to vote for a budget, David Harris gave a very impassioned speech. He was one of those Republicans who voted for a budget just before it was threatened that the bond rating of Illinois would fall to junk status, and he was like yelling, I didn't get elected to come down here to oversee the demise of the state of Illinois. So Dave, your thoughts on how Pritzker and Stratton are doing in at least putting on the vision of trying to get along with everybody.
They're certainly making a big deal out of everything, putting out a lot of news releases and having a lot of big names on these big committees. It sounds like they're trying to get a lot of positive momentum heading into the thing. And for Governor Rauner's part, he said, I think in Chicago, after he lost the election, that he and Pritzker would be together at the Bicentennial Celebration, such as that will be, and he wants to make a show of unity and that he will cooperate. And it's interesting because the governor had in the past criticized Pat Quinn, the man whom he beat for governor 4 years ago, for not calling him, not conceding to him, not even showing up at the inauguration in 2015. So it looks like a positive start for Governor Rauner as he transitions out of the governor's office and makes way for Pritzker.
Yeah, and of course the whole, we're going to see probably several more committees coming up. Adrianna, I'm not sure what all of them are, but more to do on the transition, so we'll see where it goes.
Yeah, for sure, and I think it's interesting, but I also think it's good that they are trying to bring in bipartisanship. I know that there are a lot of Republicans who weren't happy with Rauner, and maybe they still voted for him just because they picked party over policy or whatnot, but by bringing in more Republicans, that might make more people trust and support their soon-to-be governor.
Yeah, well, you can talk the talk, you got to walk the walk too, and see if the policy actually comes down to people in the room having an effect.
Rauner didn't get even 40% of the vote. The people have spoken. It didn't work.
It was a very interesting 4 years, wasn't it? Let's just talk briefly about that bicentennial celebration. We did find out recently that this has been kind of a big thing all year. There is a December 3rd event where people, entertainers with Illinois roots like Buddy Guy, the blues musician, to the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, or at least part of it, they're all going to be at this celebration. And they had it at the United Center, but then they recently announced, no, it's going to be at a venue at Navy Pier instead, which is a lot smaller. I guess maybe people aren't as excited, or I don't know. It's just an unfortunate kind of a planning glitch for this nonprofit group.
Well, I don't really sense a lot of excitement about the Illinois Bicentennial, even though there have been some interesting things like the top 200 lists or whatever. But as far as going out into the winter on a Monday night to the United Center in Chicago and seeing whatever celebration it's going to be, I'm not sure there was a demand for it.
Well,
actually, I am sure there wasn't a demand for it.
You mean you're not going to make a special trip up just to cover this event? Or
let me think. No.
Okay, that was. Speaking of Illinois and history, okay, the Abraham Lincoln hat, the purported Abraham Lincoln hat, that was part of a collection, the Taper collection purchased by the foundation set up to help the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library and Museum. The whole collection costs like $25 million. Some years later we figure out, and it was purchased in 2007. Then we figure out maybe the hat isn't authentic, maybe it wasn't Abraham Lincoln's, and there was a hearing on that this week, or this last week at the legislature. Adrianna, where are we with this, and who was that Abraham Lincoln presenter guy that was just like him?
That was something else, let me tell you. But yeah, the foundation came in and they basically told lawmakers, hey, can we have a $9 million loan? Because if we don't get that, we're going to have to sell some of the things or auction them off in order to pay back this $23 million loan that they took out in 2007. And many lawmakers, including Representative Tim Butler, have kind of questioned if the state will even give them money because of the issues with the hat. I know that Butler and another senator earlier, just hours ago, I believe.
Jason Berkman, I think.
Yes, he said that they wanted an audit conducted on the finances of the foundation. And so I don't know, especially, I mean, the state has, a $7.5 billion backlog right now. I don't know that they want to give $9 million to this foundation when they don't even know if the money's going to where it should be going.
Yeah, and I did talk to Tim Butler briefly about that, and as a private foundation, you can't audit everything they do, but they interface with the library and museum because I think proceeds from the gift shop at the museum and proceeds from food service there benefit the foundation. I know the foundation people sell some kind of tickets or memberships that give you free access to, or perhaps cheaper access to the museum, something like that. And so he thinks that the Auditor General of the state of Illinois, Frank Martino's office, they could look at least those parts of the financial picture to get a better view. Dave?
I think it's interesting that we have not heard much, especially at that hearing, that the collection was purchased from one of the foundation's own board members, Louise Taper. And that's how it all started. And how does that kind of thing happen?
Yes, well, that's part of the ongoing questions about that. I know that there's a guy named Tony Leone who who's a big Lincoln enthusiast who lives in Springfield and who was on one of the initial boards overseeing the presidential library, I think, when George Ryan was here, who has questioned those things significantly and then is no longer on the board because people moved on. So it's a very interesting situation. The head of the committee that had this hearing is Representative Ann Williams. She chairs it. She had a discussion with me. She's actually thinks it would be a fine idea to present the hat at the museum, because right now they're not showing it because of the question of where it actually came from. And she thinks it would be a good idea to show how the research is done. I guess the word is provenance. What is the origin of an artifact like that in history? Yeah, the chain of custody, how you do that, the DNA tests that were surreptitiously done on the hat that some people didn't know about, including Alan Lowe, the new director, when he came in. So he broke his financial tie to the foundation just so that there wouldn't be any conflict of interest. It's an ongoing controversy, and as Representative Tim Butler said at that hearing, it's just a shame that this great jewel of a museum in the middle of Springfield, and because of the hat situation, has become kind of a laughingstock in a situation or a front page story in the New York Times. Well, we're going to have to leave it at there for this week. Adrianna Pitrelli, Dave Dahl, thank you for joining me. I'm Bernie Schoenburg. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Capitol View.